They found the bones buried beneath the floorboards, inscribed with strange symbols. Questions to the gods scratched into turtle shells, then scorched until they cracked. But here's what no one tells you. Some of those cracks match later events exactly. Earthquakes, plagues, rebellions, recorded before they happened. Was ancient China guided by prophecy, or did its rulers simply rewrite fate to control history? Before Rome was born, before pyramids rose in Egypt, a people by the Yellow River had already mapped the stars, engineered canals, and debated the morality of power. Their rulers didn't just wear crowns, they claimed to be sons of heaven. But here's the uncomfortable question. If China's civilization really never collapsed, what happened to the others? Why did the Mayans vanish? Why did Mesopotamia burn? Why did the Indus go silent? What did China do differently? Or more terrifyingly, what did they never stop doing? The seat of heaven, the sky cracked, and no one looked up. They say a goddess stitched it back together with 5 colored stones. That's the legend. But there's something they never told you. A recently unearthed Warring States manuscript, buried beneath a Confucian tomb, describes a different Nuwa, not a healer, a saboteur, the one who broke the sky and blamed it on chaos. Now ask yourself, why does every great Chinese myth begin with someone destroying the world first? What if Pangu and Nuwa weren't just stories? What if these myths were the first state propaganda, deployed strategically by warlords to retroactively justify dynastic power? Because here's the truth scholars don't teach in school. The Pangu myth is not ancient. The first written version only appears in the 3rd century AD, 1,000 years after the Shang dynasty. The mandate of heaven wasn't divine. It was invented by the Zhou after slaughtering the Shang royal family, to say heaven wanted it. The goddess Nua's tale was edited over centuries, scrubbed clean of its most disturbing elements, including incest, blood sacrifice, and feminine rage. So ask yourself, is history shaped by truth, or by those who bury it deep enough to become sacred? If a civilization can rewrite the origin of the universe, what makes you think they haven't rewritten everything else? Comment below. What's a truth you believed about history that now feels suspicious? In 1978, a bulldozer struck bone in Henan. The diggers thought it was a mass grave from the Cultural Revolution. It wasn't. It was older, by 8,000 years. And no one, not even the party, wanted to talk about what was inside. Because inside that pit, they found flutes, wine jars, animal entrails, and human skulls, carved like bowls. This wasn't a village. It was an altar, China's first, and its most dangerous. The unwritten era, before dynasties, before names, before the Shang, before the Yellow Emperor, before the first stroke of Chinese writing, there were 3 civilizations. But unlike Egypt, they didn't leave monuments. They left music, blood, and math. The Jiahu measured tones, the Liangzhu measured stars, the Longshan measured skulls, and none of them were supposed to survive history, but they did. Buried beneath dynastic lies. They fermented rice wine 2,000 years before Mesopotamia. They buried women with flutes made from crane wings. They carved turtle shells with symbols 4,000 years before writing was invented. In 1986, a set of Jiahu symbols were classified internally by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences as a proto-language. The finding was never made public. Why? Because it contradicted the state-endorsed narrative of writing beginning with Shang. The dynasty aligned with the mandate of heaven. If writing existed before the mandate, then what else is fake? The Liangzhu people built massive hydraulic systems 500 years before Egypt. Their capital had levees, floodgates, aqueducts, run by priests, not kings. But every elite grave contains jade smeared with red ochre, facing astronomical alignments. Infrared scans in 2019 revealed intentional ritual flooding of key sites. This wasn't climate collapse. It was mass sacrificial abandonment. Why would a civilization drown itself? And more disturbingly, what did they think it would appease? While Jiahu was musical and Liangzhu was mystical, Longshan was brutal. Polished black pottery, fortified settlements, and execution pits where children were bludgeoned and dumped in rows. They had no writing, but they used ritual scoring on skulls. Some had symbols burned into them. Why? One site revealed a stone altar with concentric pits, each filled with sacrificed twins. The markings on the altar, later mirrored in Shang oracle bones, a direct bloodline of thought. Were the Shang kings rulers, or just better organized cultists with bronze? Why aren't these cultures in school books? Because they threaten everything the mandate of heaven depended on. That order came from the gods, that the Shang invented writing, that power flowed from heaven to emperor in a straight line. But these people wrote before kings, sacrificed before laws, and built paradise, only to burn it down. If Chinese civilization started with wine, flutes, and ritual murder, not emperors, what does that say about how we define civilization today? Do we build nations on truth or on useful myths? Let's see your take in the comments. The Shang rose on scorched altars, speaking through tortoise shells. If you are here, thank you. Hit that subscribe button to help us get to 1,000 subscribers as we take you on the journey of different history documentaries. But for now, let's continue with the history of China. What if your civilization was built on a lie so old that even the liars forgot it was fake? Not a myth, not a legend, a calculated invention buried so deep in time that its forgers vanished and left only faith behind. Today, Chinese school children learn that the Xi Dynasty was the cradle of their 5,000-year civilization. But here's the catch. There's not a single word from the Xi themselves. No inscriptions, no names, no records, only ruins. And ruins don't speak for themselves. Someone else does the speaking. It's who needed Xia to exist and what they were trying to hide. We have a site, Erlitou, a city of palaces with no king, no walls, no script, no war trophies, a center of sophisticated bronze ritual tools. But no epics, no myths, only bones scorched in fire, and one flute made from a human femur. One Erlitou tomb contained signs of violent sacrifice, but also high craftsmanship. These were ritual elites, not simple tribesmen. And the city, unlike later Shang capitals, was built without defensive walls. Why? Because its control was invisible. It didn't need soldiers. It needed belief. What if Erlitou was not a kingdom, but a state religion? What if Xia was not a dynasty, but a mythic umbrella retroactively painted over this religious complex to give the Zhou and later China a divine origin story that bypassed the inconvenient, blood-soaked Shang? We may be standing on the remains of a religion so ancient, it was erased by its own descendants. The Shang didn't deny the Xia. They ignored it. In over 150,000 oracle bone inscriptions, not one mentions Xia. Not one. That silence is not an accident, because when writing finally appears, it does so with power, pain, and control of the dead. In turtle shells, scapulae, and dragon bones, a new force enters history. A script made not for storytelling, but for speaking to the spirits. And the first people to write down history wrote it in blood. Birth of the Chinese writing system, oracle bones, turtle shells, and the Shang kings. Before the Chinese script was used to tell stories, it was used to talk to ghosts. Who were they writing for? And more terrifyingly, who was writing back? If ancient writing began as a dialogue with the dead, what does that make our history? Tell us what you think in the comments. The first written words in Chinese history weren't used to record laws, literature, or love. They were written to ask the dead if the king would survive the week. 1200 BCE Yin, the Shang capital. A world lit by firelight and blood, where the king was both sovereign and medium, not of the people, but of the dead. His court was filled not with advisors, but diviners. His library, a pile of cracked ox scapulae and scorched turtle shells. These weren't just fortune-telling toys. They were state documents. They told the future. And when the answers were wrong, someone died. The Shang weren't the inventors of writing in China. At least, not entirely. You see, something strange happens when archaeologists try to trace where Shang script came from. There's a void, no gradual development, no clumsy pictographs, just a fully mature, fully structured writing system that appears like a hallucination in the dirt. Over 4,000 distinct characters, some that match modern Chinese, some that don't exist anywhere else. And here's the twist. Archaeologists have found similar symbols etched into jade artifacts from the Liangzhu culture 1,000 years before the Shang. Did the Shang kings invent Chinese writing? Or did they steal it from the ghost of a forgotten civilization? The bones told the kings what days were lucky, when to attack, when to marry, when to sacrifice children. One king asked if his toothache was a divine curse. Another asked if the queen's death was the result of failing to honor the ancestors. Thousands of such records exist, but here's the part that no one explains. The inscriptions stop. Not because the practice ended, but because the dynasty did. The last oracle bones speak not of power, but of panic. Repeated inscriptions ask, have we angered heaven? Will the Shang fall? Then, nothing. The bones fall silent, and another voice rises to take their place. In the aftermath of the Shang collapse, one idea would rise that would reshape China forever. Heaven does not choose kings. It replaces them. The Zhou would use that idea to justify revolution, but they couldn't keep the world from splitting apart. As divine authority crumbles, warlords rise. Kings turn into generals. Philosophers turn into weapons. And ancient China enters its most terrifying phase, a time when everyone claimed heaven's blessing, and no one had it. If writing was born not to communicate with people, but to control them through fear of the dead, what does that say about how we use language today? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do we still write for the ghosts? Dragons and warring states. What if I told you that the divine right to rule in ancient China was the world's first psychological weapon, not given by gods but engineered by ruthless men to justify betrayal, murder, and bloodshed? And that the most revered figure of Chinese statecraft, the Duke of Zhou, may have been the original puppeteer behind this deadly theater? 1046 BCE, the Shang dynasty, known for brutal decadence and obscure rituals, didn't just fall to swords. It collapsed under the weight of lost legitimacy. The Zhou did not simply conquer. They redefined what power meant. They claimed heaven itself withdrew its favor from the Shang kings, punishing their immorality. But no oracle, no celestial voice ever spoke directly. Instead, the Duke of Zhou crafted a story, written in texts designed to last millennia, that gave the Zhou a sacred license to kill. This wasn't theology, it was political psychology. a contract where kings ruled by virtue of being approved, but also conditionally disposable. But here's the secret rarely told. The Duke of Zhou may have sidelined his own nephew to secure his grip on power under the guise of acting as regent. This shadow coup planted the seeds of distrust between royal bloodlines, turning family into enemies and loyalty into suspicion. And this cycle of bloodshed was embedded in the very idea of the mandate of heaven. A king's failure wasn't just bad governance. It was a cosmic crime punishable by death. This theology laid the groundwork for centuries of violent succession struggles, and it never stopped being weaponized. Under the Zhou, the empire fractured into feudal states with armies rivaling the king's. Each lord declared themselves the true holder of heaven's favor, turning China into a battlefield where propaganda was as lethal as swords. This fragmentation planted the dark irony. The more chaos, the more desperate the claim to divine right. King Yu of Zhou's ignominious death in 771 BCE, tricked and burned alive, was no mere tragedy. It was a signal that even heaven's mandate was powerless against human greed and deception. The mandate no longer controlled kings. Kings controlled the mandate, twisting it like a sword to stab rivals. The Zhou court limped east, powerless as feudal lords warred incessantly. And in the shadows of this collapse, a new age of brutal warlords emerged, dragons not of myth, but of blood and steel, each claiming to embody heaven's will while sowing endless destruction. If divine right can be forged by lies, and if those who claim heaven's favor often hide the darkest secrets, how do you know your leaders today aren't playing the same game? Would you trust a mandate built on blood, or would you tear it down? Let us know below. The mandate of heaven was never a guarantee, it was a battlefield. And in the next chapter, amidst ruins and endless conflict, a mosaic of ideas will rise. Philosophies that question, challenge, and threaten the very legitimacy of kings. Join us next time for Spring and Autumn to Warring States, a mosaic of philosophies and warlords. Confucius walks among ruins, where the fight for power becomes a fight for meaning, and the ideas born in chaos will shape all of China's future. In ancient China, the first men to write about peace had to wade through rivers of blood just to be heard. And one of them, Confucius, watched his own students executed for practicing what he preached. 771 BCE, the Zhou dynasty collapses, not with rebellion, but with a signal fire meant as a joke. King Yu of Zhou lights the warning beacons to amuse his favorite concubine. No one comes. Days later, the Quanrong barbarians invade the capital. The king is beheaded. The joke ends the Western Zhou forever. Now over 140 rival states erupt like fractures across the land. Brothers betray brothers. Nobles hire assassins like court musicians. Armies plunder towns not for conquest, but because their soldiers are starving. Famine becomes policy. Cannibalism is recorded in court chronicles, not as rumors, but documented state events. And amid the horror, one man begins to write, a middle-aged scholar named Kong Xiu. History will know him as Confucius. Why would a man talk about morality when everyone else is sharpening blades? Confucius wasn't just a philosopher, he was an unemployed bureaucrat with dangerous ideas. The ruler must be virtuous, he wrote, but most rulers at the time burned virtue for fuel. Confucius begged warlords for jobs. He offered moral advice to men who ordered mass executions before breakfast. In the state of Qi, he served under Duke Jing until the Duke traded him for a team of dancers. In Lu, he tried reforming politics. Result? He was exiled for challenging the Ji clan, who secretly sold state grain during a famine. What textbooks don't tell you? Confucius watched one of his favorite disciples, Zilu, get torn to pieces by dogs during a coup in Wei. The sage we quote today was, in his own time, treated like a political virus. What happens when your peaceful teachings lead others to the grave? Most think Chinese philosophy was born in serene temples. Number It was born on execution grounds. Mozi condemned rituals while commanding armies. Laozi wrote about retreat while watching governments massacre pacifists. Legalism wasn't a theory, it was a military operating system for controlling populations through fear. In the state of Qin, a man named Shang Yang began testing theories of total obedience. He made turning in your father for tax evasion a virtue. He executed 70,000 citizens in 1 year, just to prove the law had no exceptions. Quote from Shang Yang's school, "The people must fear the law more than death." And while this unfolded, Confucius's ideas were being twisted, used to justify blind loyalty, used to suppress dissent. He became a myth while alive, and was weaponized before he was cold in the ground. If Confucius became the tool of tyrants, who could stand against the machine? The world was changing, but not through words. It changed through engineering, through death tech. A new weapon emerged in the warring states, the crossbow, deadly, cheap, trainable in days. And alongside it came two forces more powerful than armies, legalism and Taoism. Coming next, weapons and wisdom. How war invented thought, and how thought sharpened the knives of kings. They say the crossbow democratized death. But what if it also birthed ideologies built for empire? Weapons and wisdom. How war gave birth to China's darkest ideas. The first time a crossbow bolt pierced a general's throat, China realized wisdom would need to evolve faster than death. 475 BCE, the first military use of the mass-produced crossbow in the state of Shu. Archaeologists in Zhongling County uncovered a buried peasant with an iron crossbow trigger tucked inside his ribs. This was no general, no noble. This was someone who was never meant to have power, and yet he held the power to kill one. The crossbow wasn't just a weapon, it was the death of the aristocracy. The Zhou ideal of the noble warrior was shattered. Suddenly, any poor man could assassinate a duke from the shadows of a rice field. Why is this dangerous? Because when killing becomes easy, governments mutate. What philosophy could survive in a world where one mistake ends a dynasty? 360 BCE, Xiangyang wasn't a tyrant at first. He was a reformer, the kind who promised to fix the chaos. His solution? Control everything. He divided families. He made military service the only path to advancement. He branded criminals' faces, severed noses, crushed dissent. He passed a law requiring citizens to spy on each other. If you didn't report a crime, you were punished as if you committed it. His own son broke a law. Xiangyang refused to pardon him. His son was executed. Xiangyang was later executed by being torn apart by chariots. Under laws, he wrote himself. Legalism wasn't a philosophy, it was a manual for totalitarianism. But what happens when people stop fighting the state and start escaping it entirely? Where legalism tightened its grip, Taoism vanished like mist. Laozi, whether real or myth, left only a single instruction: withdraw. The more you meddle, the more you ruin. Tao Te Ching. Taoism taught that resisting power was foolish. Survival came by not being seen. Some early Taoist texts were written using coded metaphor, readable only by those who knew the oral key. These weren't just teachings. They were philosophical encryption, designed to avoid censorship by states like Qin. In a time where silence was survival, one man still tried to change the world with words. 400 BCE, He was a carpenter, a philosopher, a military engineer. He preached universal love, but he also led teams of battle-hardened defenders who traveled city to city, building counter-siege weapons to stop invasions. Mosey's disciples kept military manuals as sacred texts, detailing gear ratios, defensive angles, machine blueprints. This was a pacifist movement that built better war machines than any army. Why? Because Mosey believed defense of the innocent was not violence, it was moral duty. The people of the world are all alike, but the world disagreed. Mosey's name was eventually erased from imperial texts during the Qin dynasty, banned, forgotten, until his writings were rediscovered in the 20th century. But while Mohism vanished, one state took everything he feared and built an empire out of it. They burned the books, buried the scholars alive, and built a wall so massive you could see it from heaven. But all he really wanted was to live forever. Next episode, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, China's first unifier, the man who outlawed thought, rewrote time, and died trying to defeat death itself. History doesn't remember him as a man because he never planned to die as one. 259 to 221 BCE, Yingzheng was born during a solar eclipse. His father was a political hostage. His mother, a former concubine gifted to a merchant who may have fathered the boy destined to unify China and erase everything before him. But here's the part they don't teach. The moment he took the throne, he outlawed the past. He renamed himself Shi Huangdi, not king, not emperor, but first August God ruler. And he declared a new age. The world begins now. He issued a decree prohibiting historians from comparing him to previous kings. Anyone caught doing so was executed. What kind of ruler fears being remembered? In unifying the warring states, Qin did something even more radical than war. He standardized reality. One currency, one script, one axle length for every card. But the price of unity wasn't order. It was silence. Those who resisted were buried, literally. Some segments of the Great Wall contain human bones in the mortar. Workers who died were repurposed as filler. The wall wasn't built to keep enemies out. It was built to keep citizens in. During an eclipse, the emperor once ordered all public activities to stop, not for ritual, but to test loyalty. Disobedience was met with death. But even a ruler who commands the sky can't command the grave. By age 40, Qin Shi Huang was sending alchemists and warships to find the mythical isles of the immortals. They returned with promises and poison. He drank mercury daily, believing it would preserve his soul. It decayed his brain, distorted his perception, and fed his obsession. He became convinced ghost assassins were sent by his dead enemies. So he built a palace where he could sleep in a different room every night. Even his ministers didn't know where he'd be at dawn. Qin's obsession with immortality wasn't just mystical. He ordered the destruction of medical texts, except those about life extension. When he finally died, his death was covered up for weeks. His chariot was packed with rotting fish to mask the smell as his corpse toured the empire, so no province would dare rebel. But if you think that's horrifying, wait until you hear what was buried with him. Qin Shi Huang's tomb was not a burial. It was an afterlife operation zone, an entire underground city constructed by 700,000 workers, most of whom never left alive. Crossbows rigged to fire at intruders, mercury rivers to mirror the Milky Way. A full bureaucratic office staffed with clay scribes, clay horses, and clay generals. Not statues, not art. A military campaign into the afterlife. The underground complex is deliberately unexcavated. Modern scanners detect toxic levels of mercury in the ground. The Chinese government has left it sealed, possibly forever. And then the Terracotta Army, 8,000 warriors, none alike. But here's the twist. They're not just facing outward. Some face inward, toward the tomb, as if guarding not from outsiders, but from something within. Who were they protecting or containing? Next episode, Terracotta Army Unveiled. Was it protection, propaganda, or panic? New archaeology reveals the psychological horror behind the emperor's final plan and why we may never open the tomb at all. Grave of Heaven, the empire that tried to cheat death. Terracotta Army Unveiled. The shadow war beneath China's first empire. He built an empire with laws. Then he tried to conquer the afterlife with legislation. The Terracotta Army is not a mystery. It is a confession, written in silence, buried under 7,000 tons of soil and fear. And it's still watching us. 221 BCE, China is unified by brutality, not diplomacy. Qin Shi Huang abolishes hereditary titles, standardizes script, weights, punishments, and dreams. He erases gods, burns texts, buries scholars. And yet, he commissions thousands of hand-sculpted soldiers, musicians, and ministers for the dead. Why? Not belief, control. Qin didn't fear death. He feared what came after. But the way he designed his tomb, it wasn't meant to keep the living out. It was meant to keep something in. Each warrior is different. That's not art. That's registration. Recent AI facial recognition analysis, 2022, has revealed possible correlations between warrior features and known census records from the Qin dynasty. Translation: these may be real people, turned into clay, not symbols, not soldiers, replicas of the imperial machine. The afterlife wasn't paradise. It was another administrative zone. He didn't build heaven. He built a ministry of eternal affairs. But who guards a tomb for 2,000 years when the emperor's already dead? Unless he's not. Ancient texts described rivers of liquid mercury. Most dismissed it as myth. But modern magnetometers reveal staggeringly high mercury content. Not accidental, engineered. Historians now suspect Qin was replicating the cosmic map, a geochemical simulation of the afterlife, with mercury flowing like celestial rivers under a mechanically sealed pyramid. Here's the part no one wants to say on camera. The trap mechanisms described by Sima Qian, they're real. Engineers from the Shanxi excavation team confirmed preserved mechanical triggers in sealed pits as recently as 2021. They haven't been disabled, just avoided. But what if the entire site isn't a tomb, but a machine? What if Qin didn't plan to rest in the afterlife, but to rule it? So why haven't we opened the central tomb chamber? One word: containment. There's no scholarly consensus. But multiple archaeologists have refused to participate in opening it, not from superstition, but from patterns. Because every excavation pit previously opened has shown signs of collapse, corrosion, or sabotage. Could the entire design be a self-destructing mausoleum, a time-lock threat? And here's the quiet fear inside the academic community. What if the real secret isn't spiritual, but biological? A sealed chamber, a corpse preserved in mercury, a time capsule with ancient pathogens. Qin didn't believe in death. He believed in total systems control, including the ability to infect the future. The Qin dynasty died with its emperor, but his legacy became the blueprint for the Han, who perfected what Qin only began. The Han didn't bury their power. They exported it. They opened silk routes, built embassies, mapped stars, and dreamed of empire without end. But did the Han inherit more from Qin's tomb than they realize? If you had access to Qin Shi Huang's sealed tomb and could open it once, knowing it might unleash something lost for 2,000 years, would you do it? Or should some truth stay buried? Comment open it or seal it forever below. Let the war over history begin. The Han in the world. You don't vote for your boss. You fill out a form, wait in line, and prove your loyalty. That's not democracy. That's Han Dynasty governance. 2,000 years old and still in your bloodstream. The Han didn't conquer land. They conquered behavior. From 141 BCE under Emperor Wu, China weaponized thought itself. The Confucian classics weren't schoolwork. They were psychological templates. Each phrase encoded a hierarchy. Every test ensured obedience. This wasn't education. It was a civilizational virus, passed through scrolls and skin, designed to make you govern yourself. By 124 BCE, the Imperial Academy began producing men who didn't just serve the emperor. They thought like the emperor. And just when Han ideology reached internal perfection, they realized they needed something their moral universe couldn't provide: horses that bled. The Han military collapsed in Central Asia. The nomads, Xiongnu, were fast, brutal, and mounted on monsters. These weren't Chinese horses. These were Fergana horses, sleek, foreign, powerful. They bled when ridden hard, and Han generals believed they were born from dragons. The empire became obsessed. Emperor Wu declared war, not for land, but for a blood-stained animal. Zhang Qian's mission west wasn't diplomacy, it was survival. He was sent to find an ally, but returned with something more dangerous: ideas. The Han learned about other states that weren't Confucian, other ways of organizing humans, other ways of being. The Han weren't alone, and that terrified them. What they found next, cities that looked like Chang'an but weren't Chinese, would reshape history's trade networks and begin the Silk Road. The Han believed Da-Qin, Rome, was ruled by philosopher kings. They thought Rome was Confucian without knowing Confucius. But what if that wasn't a coincidence? Rome had senators, civil offices, written law. China had ministers, exams, and moral ranks. And here's the part no one tells you. Both empires built systems that outlived their gods. But only the Han built one that outlived its collapse. The Han system never truly fell. It mutated into Tang, into Ming, into Mao, into how modern China runs its government right now, screening loyalty through tests, not votes. So ask yourself, when you check a box on a bureaucratic form, when you follow protocol to be promoted, when you work in a system that rewards obedience masked as merit, are you living in a democracy or a 2,000-year-old Confucian simulation? But something threatened the simulation: contact with a world that didn't follow its rules. A network of cities that smelled of incense, blood, and freedom, connected by silk, not scrolls. The Han never wanted the world. They wanted order. But when they opened the road from Chang'an to Antioch, they realized something horrifying. You can export silk, but you can't export obedience. Silk Road opens. From Chang'an to Rome, China's first brush with globalization and the power of silk. A single bolt of fabric unraveled two empires, and someone along the road was already counterfeiting Chinese silk and Han virtue. What do you think would happen if the Silk Road reopened today, not as a trade route, but as a moral battleground? Drop your answer. You're being watched. Silk Road opens. From Chang'an to Rome, China's first brush with globalization and the power of silk. What if the thread that connected ancient empires, the thread of silk, was also the thread that almost tore the Han Dynasty apart? What if the world's first globalization was a gamble with fate so deadly it nearly ended China's imperial dream? In the twilight of the 3rd century BCE, the Han Dynasty stood as a colossus, a political and cultural titan stretching its arms across vast lands. Yet beneath this grandeur lay a fragile truth. The empire's borders were permeable, its security always under threat from restless nomads and rival kingdoms. Emperor Wu of Han, a ruler obsessed with expanding China's might, dreamed of linking his realm to the unknown lands far beyond, the lands whispered of in dark taverns and secret courtrooms. But the path ahead was more than just rocky. It was a labyrinth of political intrigue, deadly deserts, and a threat so immense it would haunt China for decades. What secret mission would risk everything? And why did the fate of an empire hinge on a single man's perilous journey to the west? Zhang Qian, a minor noble and court official, was sent as an envoy into the treacherous lands beyond the Han borders. Captured by the Xiongnu and held captive for over a decade, he became a prisoner in a shadow war between two colossal powers. Against all odds, Zhang escaped, but what he carried back was far more explosive than silk or spices. He returned with knowledge of foreign alliances, strange cultures, and a tangled web of diplomatic risks that could ignite the Han Empire from within. But was Zhang a hero or a harbinger of chaos? Because what followed his journey wasn't just trade, it was the opening of a Pandora's box. Silk wasn't just a luxury, it was Han China's greatest weapon and its most dangerous weakness. While the secret of silk production was fiercely guarded, punishable by death, rumors and spies slowly chipped away at the monopoly. Chinese silk enchanted Rome, sparking a trade imbalance so severe that some historians argue it drained Roman gold reserves, destabilizing their economy. The Silk Road was less a peaceful trade route and more a battlefield of espionage, economic warfare, and cultural domination, a global chess game played in shadows and silk threads. And as the trade flourished, rival powers plotted in silence. What if the silk you admire today was the tool of invisible wars, and the Silk Road a front line of ancient geopolitical sabotage? Far from China's palaces, the Parthians, masters of camel caravans and cunning diplomacy, thrived by controlling the middle ground, profiting from tensions and feeding discord between East and West. Meanwhile, Rome's elite, dazzled and addicted to silk, failed to realize they were being drawn into a game of influence they couldn't control. What if the Silk Road wasn't just about goods moving from east to west, but ideas, loyalties, and betrayals, fueling conflicts that shaped the fate of continents? The opening of the Silk Road marked the dawn of globalization, but the story behind it is darker, more complex, and far more dangerous than most realize. And it all began with Zhang Qian, an explorer whose journey was almost fatal, a story of captivity, survival, and the daring gamble that reshaped the ancient world. Who was Zhang Qian really? A prisoner, a spy, or the man who unwittingly ignited a geopolitical firestorm? Discover the untold story of China's first great explorer and why his mission nearly ended the Han Empire before it began. If you were Zhang Qian, stranded in hostile lands for over a decade, would you have risked everything to bring back secrets that could save or doom your empire? Tell us your verdict below. Zhang Qian's epic journey, the explorer, who discovered the West for the Han and why it was nearly fatal. Long before the world knew the Silk Road, an empire trembled not just from foreign threats, but from secrets so powerful they threatened to unravel the very fabric of its civilization. The man who opened China's eyes to the West returned with more than maps and silk. He brought knowledge that would ignite the Han scientific revolution and awaken an empire to its own fragility. What if I told you Jiang Qian's journey was the trigger that forced the Han to confront not only external enemies, but the very limits of human understanding itself? This is mid-2nd century BCE, the Han Dynasty under Emperor Wu, a time when China transformed from a fractured kingdom to a powerhouse of innovation and global ambition. Jiang Qian's mission to the West was about more than alliances. It shattered old worldviews and sparked an unprecedented wave of scientific inquiry, political paranoia, and cultural self-awareness. But this awakening came at a price, one rarely told, and one that almost destroyed the fragile empire from within. Zhang's capture by the Xiongnu wasn't random. It was a calculated political move to control the flow of intelligence. His escape was riddled with betrayals and near-death encounters few have dared recount. When he finally returned, his revelations didn't just open trade routes. They exposed the Han court to alien ideas that fractured political factions. Some saw the West as an opportunity, others as a threat to Chinese identity. Most shockingly, Zhang's findings accelerated breakthroughs in astronomy, cartography, and even the invention of early seismographs, not as isolated progress, but as survival mechanisms against unknown foreign forces now within sight. Imagine the weight on Jiang Qian's shoulders. After years imprisoned, navigating deserts and hostile kingdoms, he arrives home to a court divided, suspicion rampant, and his life hanging by a thread. One advisor whispered, "This man brings not just silk and spices, but the seeds of chaos." Zhang's report set off secret expeditions, surveillance networks, and a feverish race to record and understand the world like never before. Jiang Qian's journey was more than China's story. It was a global pivot. His discoveries anticipated modern globalization's paradoxes, the blend of exchange and conflict, innovation and instability. And beneath the surface, a quiet revolution brewed, scientific advances that would echo for millennia. Jiang Qian's journey forced the Han to ask, how do you govern a world suddenly too vast to control? How do you prepare when the threats are invisible? Seismic tremors, political spies, and cultural upheavals. Next episode, we delve into the Han's answer to these impossible questions. How did the empire invent the world's first seismograph, lay the foundations of paper, and create the first systematic historical record with Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian? The birth of historical consciousness itself, a legacy that still shapes how we understand history today. If you were a Han court official, faced with knowledge too dangerous to ignore, but too destabilizing to accept, would you embrace change or fight to preserve the old order? Could curiosity be a threat to survival? Let us know your choice and why. Han Science and Culture, the empire that invented history and silenced the truth. What if I told you the world's first earthquake detector was less a tool of science and more a device to suppress rebellion? That the same empire which birthed paper and wrote the first real history also buried secrets so dangerous they threatened to unravel the dynasty itself? Welcome to the Han Dynasty, the original battleground where knowledge became power, and power demanded silence. We're deep in the Han Dynasty's golden age, roughly 100 BCE to 100 CE, a time when China's vast empire stretched farther than ever before. Emperor Wu's court dazzled with inventions and learning, but behind the shimmering silk curtains, paranoia ran deep. Every invention, every map, every historical scroll was a double-edged sword. Zhang Heng's bronze seismoscope didn't just detect earthquakes from hundreds of miles away, it was a political weapon. Why? Because in an empire riddled with secret plots and rebellions, Knowing when unrest shook the borders meant the difference between survival and massacre. What's rarely told, the information it gathered was ruthlessly controlled, often kept from local governors, creating deadly blind spots. A single dropped bronze ball could mean a distant quake or a distant uprising, and the court's silence sometimes condemned whole provinces to chaos. But the real shocker? While the empire claimed to embrace knowledge, it also invented a technology that turned truth into a tool of selective forgetting. The Han perfected paper, a breakthrough that would fuel knowledge for millennia. But it was never just about spreading wisdom. Paper made it easier to rewrite history, to erase inconvenient facts, and to centralize knowledge in the hands of the emperor's loyal scribes. Cartographers didn't just map terrain, they charted a political reality designed to glorify the Han and marginalize rival states and cultures. Maps became propaganda, reinforcing an imperial worldview where dissent was literally off the map. And who bore the cost of this rewriting of reality? Sima Qian's records of the grand historian was the first attempt to write history warts and all. But this wasn't a harmless chronicle. It was a dangerous act of defiance. The emperor saw history as a tool to legitimize his rule, not question it. When Sima Qian refused to alter the record, he was sentenced to castration, a brutal punishment designed to silence him without killing the historical record he embodied. Yet in choosing survival, he immortalized truth, but at unimaginable personal cost. This isn't just ancient history. Every empire, every regime since has struggled with the same dilemma. Who controls history controls the future. The Han Dynasty's glory was forged on a knife's edge, between discovery and deception, knowledge and suppression. But all empires rot from within. In our next episode, we'll reveal how eunuchs, once the emperor's trusted servants, became the agents of corruption and betrayal that tore the Han apart. Because when ambition blinds those in power, history doesn't just get written, it repeats itself in blood. Are you ready to see the dark underbelly of the Han's fall and the echoes that still haunt history today? What price would you pay for truth in a world where silence is survival and betrayal is ambition's currency? Collapse and regret, eunuchs, corruption, and the fall of the Han. History repeats through ambition and betrayal. Imagine an empire so mighty it spanned continents, yet undone not by barbarian swords or famine, but by the very hands meant to protect its soul. Castrated men who became kings behind the throne. The Han dynasty's death wasn't a sudden strike, it was a slow poison, brewed in silence, betrayal, and a palace rife with secrets so dark they still haunt history. Late 2nd century CE, Han China. The empire's heart, the imperial court, buzzed not only with politics but with hidden war between eunuchs, powerful clans, and desperate officials. The emperor? A mere shadow. His closest advisors? Eunuchs with bloodless mouths but venomous ambitions. This collapse is more than ancient history. It is a mirror held to every empire's downfall. When insiders betray trust for power, the fall is inevitable. Eunuchs were once the emperor's trusted servants, the only men allowed inside his private chambers. But their power grew monstrously. What's rarely revealed, many eunuchs controlled secret intelligence networks, intercepting letters, spying on ministers, and orchestrating assassinations with chilling precision. They had no families, no legacies to protect, only their own ruthless survival. And some weren't eunuchs at all. Historical sources hint at a few imposter eunuchs, men who avoided castration, infiltrating the court, wielding even more influence while hiding their secret. Their duplicity was so extreme, it shredded trust within the palace walls. What happens when your most trusted guardians are liars? and worse, murderers hiding in plain sight. The once gleaming Han bureaucracy rotted beneath layers of bribery, nepotism, and black market deals. Taxes meant to fund soldiers instead lined corrupt pockets. Local officials ignored peasant uprisings as famine and disease ravaged the countryside. But the bloodiest betrayal? The Yellow Turban Rebellion. Millions rose, but the court's response was divided by eunuch infighting and backroom murders. How many innocent lives were lost because the palace was too busy playing a deadly Game of Thrones? The rebellion failed to topple the dynasty, but it shattered the illusion of Han invincibility forever. In the end, warlords like Dong Zhuo exploited the chaos, turning emperors into puppets. The eunuch's reign of terror culminated in bloody palace coups and executions. Yet many eunuchs sought to reform the dynasty secretly, attempts crushed under steel and suspicion. Recent archaeological findings reveal secret eunuch tombs, decorated with symbols of loyalty and rebellion, suggesting deep internal conflict even among the power brokers. Sound familiar? This tale of decay echoes through history, from Rome's Praetorian Guards to modern shadow governments. Unchecked power without accountability breeds ruin. The palace eunuchs were the Han's hidden disease, their poison invisible until too late. Ancient chronicler. The Han dynasty's collapse was brutal and bloody, but out of these ashes rose something unexpected. A new era where gods, inventions, and empires ghosted through history, changing warfare, culture, and belief forever. Join us next time as we unravel gods, gunpowder, and ghost empires, where ancient mysticism meets deadly innovation, and China's mysterious inventions spark revolutions that will shake the world. How did the shadow of the Han give birth to the secrets of gods and gunpowder? The answer lies ahead. What happens when divine power meets human ambition and the dead refuse to stay silent? History is never just about the past. It's a puzzle we're still trying to solve. If today's episode shook your understanding of power and betrayal, imagine what the next one will reveal. Subscribe now and join a community hungry for the truth beneath the surface. And don't keep your thoughts to yourself. Comment below with your theories or questions. Every reaction you leave helps this story reach others who need to see it. Together, we rewrite history one view at a time. Gods, gunpowder, and ghost empires. Lost for centuries in desert sands, a secret trove of scrolls threatened to rewrite everything we thought we knew about an empire's soul, and about the very idea of civilization itself. Welcome to the shadowed crossroads of history, the twilight years of China's chaotic six dynasties, 220 to 589 CE, where amidst fractured realms and endless war, an invisible revolution took root: Buddhism. But this was no peaceful spread of faith. It was a battle for survival, power, and identity on the very edges of empire. Picture this: vast desert cliffs near Dunhuang, where monks carved out hundreds of caves. Inside, breathtaking murals whisper stories of gods and ghosts, but also of spies, secret patrons, and ruthless imperial factions hiding deadly agendas beneath colorful faces. The real story: for centuries, these caves served as more than spiritual sanctuaries. They were vaults of power, their scrolls containing forbidden knowledge, treatises on warfare disguised as sutras, coded political manifestos, and maps linking distant empires along the Silk Road. When the caves were sealed mysteriously in the 11th century, the world thought they were lost forever. Why did imperial forces at times embrace this foreign religion and then violently suppress it? Because Buddhism was a double-edged sword, a source of spiritual solace, yes, but also a tool wielded by eunuchs, generals, and rebel monks to legitimize or challenge imperial rule. One monk, whose name was erased from history, orchestrated a secret network of Buddhist envoys across Central Asia, a network that would later influence not just religion, but the very diplomacy and warfare shaping Asia for centuries. Imagine spies cloaked in robes, carrying relics as passports, playing a shadow game beneath emperors' noses. The art itself hides a secret. Dunhuang's murals were propaganda machines, transforming foreign gods into Chinese heroes, subtly reshaping ideas of kingship, loyalty, and destiny. Buddhist iconography didn't just reflect culture, it created a new empire of belief, laying the spiritual groundwork for the rise of the Sui and Tang dynasties. Why did the imperial court ultimately seal the caves and hide these treasures? Was it fear of rebellion, theocratic threats, or something far darker, a conspiracy that could topple emperors? This story is not just about religion. It's a blueprint of power, betrayal, and survival in a world on the brink of transformation. And just as this fragile empire found its soul in shadows, a new era dawned, an era when the ancient capital Chang'an would become the glittering heart of the medieval world, the first true global metropolis where East met West like never before. In the next episode, we'll uncover the astonishing rise of the Sui and Tang dynasties, the secrets behind Chang'an's unimaginable wealth and diversity, and why this city was the beating heart of a world more connected and more dangerous than anything before or since. Stay curious, because history's deepest secrets are never where you expect them. Sui and Tang dynasties, the age of cosmopolitan China. How Chang'an ruled the medieval world. Before it all came crashing down, before London, Paris, or Rome ever dreamed of global power, a city at the edge of Asia was the beating heart of a civilization so vast, it commanded the loyalty of hundreds of millions. And yet its greatest enemy was not foreign invaders, but the poisonous ambition within its own palace walls. Welcome to Chang'an, the medieval world's forgotten global capital where emperors ruled like gods, but could be brought down by eunuchs' whispers and deadly intrigue. The late 6th to 9th centuries CE, during the Sui and Tang dynasties, was a time when China reunited after centuries of fragmentation. Emperor Wen of Sui reunited the empire through unprecedented brutality. His son Emperor Yang overreached with colossal projects that bankrupted the realm, sparking revolt. Then came the Tang dynasty, led by Emperor Taizong, a warrior king whose military genius expanded China's borders and whose court in Chang'an became the largest and most diverse city on earth. Yet beneath this golden age lurked Wu Zetian, history's only female emperor, whose rise to power was paved with ruthless purges and betrayals that terrified the imperial elite. Chang'an was a magnet for traders from Persia, Korea, Central Asia, and even the Byzantine Empire, bringing silk, spices, religions, and ideas. But the city was also a powder keg. Eunuchs, wielding power beyond their station, manipulated emperors, orchestrated poisonings, and crushed rivals in secret. Foreign merchants lived in guarded enclaves, wary of political storms that could sweep away fortunes overnight. Few know this. Wu Zetian's secret police employed torture and psychological warfare to crush dissent. Yet her reforms also gave women unprecedented power in court. Chang'an's wealth was financed by brutal taxation and forced labor, not prosperity alone. The Grand Canals? They were built on the backs of millions who died or fled. But the real question is, how did such a dazzling empire unravel so quickly? Was it the weight of corruption, the unchecked ambitions of palace eunuchs, or something even darker lurking beneath the surface? One chilling account tells of a eunuch so powerful he could command armies, dictate succession, and send rivals to their deaths with a single whispered order. Meanwhile, a foreign monk navigating the streets reported secret plots to assassinate the emperor, plots that nearly plunged the dynasty into chaos. The Tang's famous tributary system was not just diplomatic nicety, it was a brutal assertion of dominance wrapped in ceremonial submission. Meanwhile, the empire's meritocratic bureaucracy was riddled with favoritism and corruption, as palace factions rigged exams and sold offices. Chang'an was the beating heart of a proto-globalization, a medieval Silk Road nexus where East met West. Its rise and fall echoed timeless themes of ambition, betrayal, and the fragile nature of empire, themes that still resonate in today's geopolitical chessboard. Some historians argue Chang'an's influence is overstated, a myth inflated by nationalist nostalgia. But surviving Persian, Arab, and Japanese accounts confirm it was the largest and richest metropolis on earth at the time, outpacing even Baghdad and Constantinople. Its fall was not due to foreign conquest but internal decay, a warning to all great powers. The palace eunuchs are the invisible blades beneath the emperor's throne. Tang Court Whisper, recorded in secret diaries recently translated. Chang'an's light didn't just fade, it exploded, scattering into inventions and ideas that would shape the future. Next, we journey into the world forged from that ashes, the Tang and Song dynasties' explosive innovations, printing, paper money, gunpowder, and the compass. Inventions that nearly launched the modern world centuries before Europe even dreamed of it. Prepare to uncover the secrets of how China almost started the modern age, and why the West came so close to missing the boat. Inventions of the Tang and Song, printing, paper money, gunpowder, compasses, why China almost started the modern world. What if I told you the blueprint for the modern world was stolen, not invented, by Europe? That China's Tang and Song dynasties unleashed inventions so powerful they could have shattered empires, but their secrets were buried by betrayal, fear, and imperial paranoia? This isn't lost history, it's history erased, and the consequences still echo in today's global power struggles. Between 618 and 1279 CE, China wasn't just an empire, it was the superpower, dominating the world stage with inventions that changed the very fabric of human society. Bisheng's movable type printing emerged almost 400 years before Gutenberg, yet it was smothered in obscurity. Paper money revolutionized finance long before Europe minted coins. Gunpowder wasn't just a weapon, but a state secret locked behind palace walls. And the compass? It could have launched China's empire across the oceans, but someone chose to pull the brakes. Bisheng's invention wasn't just technology, it was a cultural earthquake. But Confucian scholars deemed it a threat to their centuries-old script and tradition. Was the world robbed of knowledge because of pride? Because fear of change crushed innovation? How did this reverence for tradition become a noose strangling progress? Paper money, the first government-issued paper currency, was a double-edged sword. It fueled unprecedented economic growth and unprecedented corruption and inflation. The Song dynasty's economy collapsed under its own innovation, sending ripples of chaos through the empire. Could this early crash explain why China hesitated to push forward? Gunpowder. Discovered by accident in the search for immortality, gunpowder became a weapon that reshaped warfare worldwide. Yet Chinese leaders kept its secrets so tightly that by the time gunpowder reached Europe, China had lost its military edge. Did China's paranoia about this deadly fire medicine contribute to the dynasty's downfall? Compass. The magnetic compass was perfected for ocean navigation, but China's sudden maritime withdrawal under Emperor Hongwu closed the doors on a global empire in the making. Was this decision driven by xenophobia, political fear, or internal power struggles? Some argue China's failure was cultural conservatism. Others blame political instability or the Mongol invasions that disrupted progress. But the truth is layered. China's story is a haunting lesson in how innovation without political vision can self-destruct. A Song Dynasty official lamented, "The very tools of our salvation may become our ruin." European observers centuries later marveled at Chinese innovations, yet the West seized the moment China lost. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. The same forces that stalled China's leap into modernity, fear of change, power struggles, and secrecy, still shape global competition today. What if history is not a linear march of progress, but a fragile game of power and timing? But this fragile empire wasn't finished. Soon the world would witness an unprecedented upheaval, the Mongol conquest. Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty would bring brutal conquest, but also transformation. Was Mongol rule a humiliation or the spark that forced China into a new age? Join us next to unravel the bloody paradox of the Mongol era, the story of fire and empire, destruction and rebirth. Mongol conquest, Kublai Khan in the Yuan dynasty, was Mongol rule a humiliation or transformation? Imagine an empire so vast it stretched from the gates of Vienna to the Pacific Ocean, yet its rule over China left scars deeper than any sword could cut. The Mongols didn't just conquer land, they shattered centuries of tradition, identity, and pride. But what if this humiliation was the dark forge that reignited the very essence of Chinese greatness? Welcome to the Yuan dynasty. The empire you thought you knew is only half the story. 1271 to 1368 CE, the apex and fall of the Yuan dynasty. A fractured China, weary from Song dynasty strife, faced a nomadic force that would not just topple dynasties, but redefine civilization itself. The Mongol invasion wasn't simply military might. It was a psychological and cultural earthquake. Kublai Khan's regime forcibly uprooted Confucian scholar officials, executed dissenters, and imposed an alien social hierarchy that placed Mongols and foreigners above native Han Chinese. But here's the brutal secret. The Mongols' disdain for Chinese institutions sparked underground resistance that would simmer for decades, fermenting a toxic mix of humiliation and defiance. Could an empire built on division ever truly rule a land that demanded unity? Despite destruction, Kublai Khan rebuilt China's infrastructure, restoring canals, reviving trade routes, and sponsoring monumental projects like Dadu, modern Beijing, blending Mongol power with Chinese grandeur. The Mongol postal relay system revolutionized communication, linking East Asia with Europe in a web of unprecedented connectivity. But this very network may have hastened the spread of the Black Death, unleashing a silent killer across continents. Paper money, first introduced under the yuan, destabilized the economy through inflation, but also laid groundwork for modern fiscal systems. The Mongols recruited foreign administrators, Persians, Arabs, even Europeans, to govern, fracturing Chinese political unity, but embedding China in a proto-globalized empire. Was this chaotic multiculturalism a curse or the seed of China's future openness? Liu Bingzhong, once a proud Confucian scholar, found himself designing a capital that symbolized Mongol dominion, torn between collaboration and cultural loss. For common people, Mongol rule meant heavy taxes, forced labor, and ethnic discrimination that fractured social fabric. Yet pockets of prosperity emerge, fueled by booming trade caravans along the revived Silk Road. The rigid four-class system alienated native Chinese and created resentment not just toward the Mongols, but among ethnic groups themselves. Rebellion, corruption, and economic collapse followed, but more than internal rot, the Yuan's downfall signaled a profound cultural reckoning, a desperate urge to reclaim a lost identity. The Mongol Empire's connective powers shaped Eurasian history, facilitating trade, cultural exchanges, and unfortunately, the transmission of plague. Its legacy is a paradox, both bridge and barrier between worlds, ushering in modern globalization while devastating populations. The Yuan dynasty remains controversial. Some see it as a dark period of foreign oppression, others as a pivotal chapter that accelerated China's integration into a wider world. This debate mirrors China's own conflicted memory of the Mongol past, revealing how history can be a battleground for identity itself. Yuan edicts boast of unity and order, yet Chinese poets lament, "A foreign wind blows through the sacred halls." Contemporary writings reveal a people caught between fear, adaptation, and quiet resistance. The Yuan dynasty's reign was a crucible of destruction and creation, a period where China's identity was violently tested, broken, and remolded. This wasn't just a chapter of conquest, it was a catalyst for China's next great awakening. But how could a nation so deeply wounded rise again with such fiery nostalgia? The answer lies in the dynasty that followed. As the Yuan dynasty crumbled under its own contradictions, a new force emerged from the ashes, an empire built on nostalgia, grandeur, and an unyielding desire to reclaim China's greatness. The Ming dynasty would erect the Forbidden City, launch Zheng He's fleets across the oceans, and spark a cultural rebirth that dazzled the world. But beneath the golden veneer lurk shadows of the past, and the question remains, was the Ming Renaissance a genuine rebirth, or a desperate attempt to rewrite history? Join us next time to uncover the dazzling rise of the Ming and the fragile legacy they inherited. The Ming Renaissance, Forbidden City, Zheng He's fleets, and the rebuilding of Chinese greatness. How nostalgia fueled a golden rebirth. Imagine an empire so grand it seemed unstoppable. The Forbidden City, gleaming under the sun, towers of jade and gold, endless corridors whispering secrets of power and glory. But behind those shining walls, the heart of Ming China wasn't beating with confidence. It was pounding with fear. What if everything you believed about this golden age was just a dazzling lie? A beautiful cage built with walls of paranoia and blood. Long before the Ming dynasty's rise, China was under Mongol rule, foreign masters who had crushed centuries of Han Chinese tradition. Then came Zhu Yuanzhang, a man born from poverty and war, who carved a bloody path to power. When he crowned himself emperor in 1368, he didn't just want a kingdom, he wanted control, absolute control. But controlling an empire meant fear, fear of betrayal, of revolt, of chaos. And so began a reign marked not only by brilliance, but by terror. Thousands vanished in purges, friends turned enemies overnight, loyalty bought with fear. This was no peaceful renaissance. It was a ruthless rebirth forged in fire and suspicion. The Forbidden City, often praised as a symbol of imperial glory, was in truth a gilded prison. Its endless halls and hidden chambers were designed to isolate the emperor from the real world. No one saw this more clearly than the court's eunuchs and spies, whose whispers and poisons shaped the fate of emperors. They played a deadly game where the stakes were life and death, where allies disappeared and rivals were crushed without a trace. Behind every ornate door was a shadow, and behind every smile, a dagger. Then there were Zhenghe's fleets, the largest and most advanced naval armadas of the era, spanning the oceans with dozens of ships and thousands of sailors, reaching as far as Africa's shores. For a moment, it seemed China would dominate the seas and shape the modern world. But suddenly, just as quickly, the voyages stopped. Why? Court politics, fear of power slipping away, ambition turned inward. Those who feared change killed the dream. Instead of conquering the seas, the Ming turned their gaze inward, sealing the empire behind closed gates. This obsession with the past, the nostalgia for a mythic Han China, became a poison. It wasn't just about pride. It became a political weapon that crushed new ideas, stifled progress, and bred suspicion of outsiders. The Ming wanted to restore a perfect golden age, but in doing so, they blinded themselves to the storm gathering on the horizon. While the world raced forward, the Ming clung to fading shadows. And those shadows, they grew darker every year. Corruption festered, the people rebelled, natural disasters ravaged the land. The great empire, once a shining beacon, began to crack beneath the surface. It was a slow, inevitable fall, masked by glitter and ceremony. The Ming Dynasty's golden age. It wasn't a triumphant dawn. It was a sunset, brilliant but fleeting. Behind the palace walls, fear and betrayal shaped an empire destined for chaos. As the Ming turned inward, the world outside was changing fast, setting the stage for revolution, collapse, and rebirth. Next, we plunge into the storm, the fall, the revolution, and the desperate struggle for return. Fall, revolution, and return. Imagine an empire so vast, yet so fragile, that its rulers clung desperately to tradition as the whole world burned around them. An empire that ruled millions, but was itself a prison for its people. This was Qing China, a dynasty born from conquest, sustained by deception, and ultimately undone not just by foreign bullets, but by the poison coursing through its own veins. The Qing dynasty began in 1644, when a ruthless Manchu minority seized power from a collapsing Ming dynasty. Under emperors Kangxi and Qianlong, China reached its territorial peak, controlling nearly 13 million square kilometers. Yet this was not a seamless union. The Manchus ruled over a Han majority with iron fists and cultural impositions so humiliating that even today scars remain. The Q hairstyle forced on Han men was more than a fashion. It was a symbol of submission, a daily reminder of defeat that many resisted at the cost of their lives. Here's what textbooks won't tell you. The Qing court tolerated and sometimes fueled widespread corruption, allowing local officials to enrich themselves while rural peasants starved. Entire provinces suffered famine and rebellion as the dynasty's grip loosened. The emperor's decrees were often ignored or twisted by bureaucrats more interested in personal gain than justice. Behind the lavish walls of the Forbidden City, the Manchu rulers lived in paranoid isolation, fearful of both their Chinese subjects and each other. The famed 100 Days Reform and late attempts at modernization were little more than desperate acts of a dying regime, too slow and out of touch to save itself. Puyi, the last emperor, was crowned at age 3, but the child emperor was nothing more than a puppet, controlled by eunuchs, warlords, and foreign powers. His fate mirrors China's humiliation, imprisoned within the walls of the imperial palace, powerless to stop the revolutionary tides washing away his world. The Qing collapse was neither heroic nor inevitable. It was the slow unraveling of an empire that could not reconcile its Manchu rulers with its Chinese majority, tradition with modernity, and pride with humiliation. The Taiping Rebellion, killing over 20 million, revealed the desperate desire for change. But the dynasty clung to power through sheer brutality and deception. The Qing decline wasn't isolated. It was part of a brutal global trend where non-Western empires faced the industrialized, militarized Western powers. But in China's case, it was not just foreign conquest but self-inflicted wounds. Opium addiction, economic dependency, and fractured sovereignty. Some argue the Qing saved China from chaos longer than expected. Others see them as the architects of their own downfall, stubbornly clinging to outdated systems while condemning millions to misery. But perhaps the most painful truth is that the dynasty was neither fully Chinese nor fully foreign, a hybrid caught in a toxic limbo. The revolutionary leader Sun Yat-sen once said, "The Qing dynasty is a coffin filled with dirt, unable to bury the suffering of the Chinese people." The dynasty's death was messy, painful, and far from glorious. As the Qing dynasty gasped its last, foreign powers didn't just wait patiently. They invaded, subjugated, and humiliated a once proud empire in ways that textbooks barely admit. The coming storm wasn't just political, it was chemical, moral, and deeply addictive. Next episode, The Opium Wars, British gunboats and national shame. What the textbooks still don't say. The Opium Wars, British gunboats and national shame. What the textbooks still don't say. Imagine an empire so vast, so ancient, that it once ruled a quarter of the world's population, brought to its knees not by armies but by addiction fueled by foreign greed. What if I told you the British Empire's most devastating weapon wasn't cannon or rifle, but opium, and that the cost of this drug war wasn't just a trade imbalance, but the near collapse of China's entire economy and social fabric? This is the untold story the textbooks won't dare to teach you. Between 1839 and 1842, the First Opium War was fought, not just over territory, but over control of China's silver, its economy, and ultimately its sovereignty. Lin Zexu, the man who would ignite the conflict by seizing over 20,000 chests of opium in Canton. William Jardine and James Matheson, ruthless British opium merchants who profited enormously from the trade. The British East India Company, which controlled opium production in colonial India, supplying millions of addicts in China and balancing Britain's vast trade deficit. Here's a secret few realize. British economic survival depended on opium revenues. The empire was financially addicted to this poison. Turning millions of Chinese into addicts was no accident, but a cold, calculated policy. China's economy was literally bleeding out. Opium imports sucked out an estimated 20 million taels of silver annually, enough to destabilize the Qing treasury and cripple local economies. Entire villages collapsed as farmers became addicts or abandoned land. Meanwhile, Qing officials faced a terrible paradox. Many were themselves opium users or profited from its illegal trade. The imperial anti-opium campaign was less a war on drugs and more a war on inconvenient rivals. But how did the Qing dynasty's moral crusade against opium become a catalyst for foreign invasion and humiliation? And why did China's fabled armies fail so catastrophically against British gunboats powered by the steam age? The answer lies in a deadly mixture of cultural arrogance, political paralysis, and brutal imperialism. Britain's industrial might translated into unstoppable naval power. The Qing dynasty's centuries-old military doctrines were obsolete in the face of steam-powered ironclads and modern artillery. More than technology, it was a clash of worldviews. Britain demanded free trade, a concept alien to the Chinese tributary system. Qing officials saw themselves as guardians of an ancient order, unable or unwilling to recognize the threat of a new global economic system where opium was currency and war a business. The resulting Treaty of Nanking wasn't just a loss of land or ports, it was the beginning of the century of humiliation that fractured China's psyche. But this was only the opening act. Addiction was only the symptom. The deeper rot was political, a regime divided, riddled with corruption, blind to reform. China was hemorrhaging sovereignty while its own bureaucrats played both sides. This contradiction inflamed widespread resentment and desperation among the population. And so, from this chaos, a tinderbox was lit, setting the stage for the most devastating internal conflicts in Chinese history. The empire was on the brink of collapse. The Opium Wars did not just shatter China's defenses, they shattered the very idea of its imperial identity. But the story doesn't end here. The scars they left triggered waves of rebellion, cultural panic, and civil war that threatened to tear the empire apart from within. Taiping and Boxer rebellions, civil war and cultural panic, China at the brink of collapse. Dive into a century of bloodshed and upheaval where millions died in revolutionary fires, and ancient beliefs clashed with brutal modernity, setting the stage for the China we know today. Taiping and Boxer rebellions, civil war and cultural panic, China at the brink of collapse. Imagine a war so deadly that it slaughtered more people than both world wars combined. Yet most textbooks treat it as a footnote, a war ignited by a failed exam candidate who claimed to be the heavenly king and a spiritual brother of Jesus Christ. But the nightmare didn't end there. Just when the Qing dynasty seemed to catch its breath, a secret society of peasants with mystical powers nearly dragged China into a global catastrophe, with the tacit blessing of its own rulers. What really tore China apart was not just foreign guns, but betrayal, paranoia, and a civilization clawing at its own flesh. Between 1850 and 1900, China was no longer the stable Middle Kingdom. It was a tinderbox of ethnic tension, spiritual upheaval, foreign intrusion, and imperial decay. The Qing dynasty, ruled by a Manchu minority with increasingly shaky legitimacy, faced challenges from within. Hong Xiuquan, whose delusions sparked the Taiping Rebellion, Empress Dowager Cixi, whose ruthless political manipulations masked desperation, various secret societies, warlords, and foreign powers with their own agendas. Hong's vision was apocalyptic. His followers were convinced the Qing were devils to be annihilated in a holy war. The Taiping's radical social reforms, like communal property and gender equality, were revolutionary but imposed with terrifying brutality. The result? A conflict that ripped through 17 provinces with estimates of 20 to 30 million dead. Mostly civilians starved or massacred in scorched earth campaigns. Yet here's the kicker few mention. Many Qing generals, including Zheng Guofan, employed scorched earth tactics and massacres that rivaled the Taiping's in savagery. The Qing survival wasn't heroic. It was a Pyrrhic victory soaked in blood and betrayal. How did a dynasty so weak manage to survive the Taipings, only to willingly gamble everything on a group of xenophobic zealots in the Boxer Rebellion? The answer lies in political desperation and the dangerous gamble of embracing chaos. By the 1890s, China was carved up like a colonial buffet. Missionaries, railroads, armies, all foreign, all unwelcome. The Boxers were peasants and martial artists who believed their rituals made them bulletproof. They were also scapegoats for centuries of failures, economic collapse, drought, and foreign humiliation. Empress Dowager Cixi initially condemned the Boxers, but soon backed them covertly, hoping their uprising would drive out foreigners and restore Qing prestige. This political roulette backfired catastrophically. When the Boxers besieged foreign legations in Beijing, the world's powers retaliated with a savage multinational force. The Qing court was forced to abandon its reckless support, but the dynasty's reputation was shattered beyond repair. These rebellions were not isolated disasters. They were symptoms of a civilization fraying at the edges. The Qing dynasty was no longer a powerful empire, but a corpse animated by fear and internal decay. Millions died, families destroyed, culture fractured. The Taiping and Boxer rebellions expose a painful truth. China's collapse was a tragic dance of faith, fury, foreign ambition, and fatal political miscalculations. These events did not just end an era, they forged the violent, chaotic birth of modern China. But the fall of dynasties is never the end of the story. Out of the ashes rose new visions of republics, revolutions, and ruthless leaders who promised to remake China in fire and blood. Next, we dive into the era of Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek, and Mao Zedong, where hope and horror collided to forge a nation reborn or forever broken. Republican dreams and communist revolution, Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek, and Mao, China remakes itself through fire. In less than 4 decades, China's centuries-old empire shattered, and out of the ashes rose a country torn by ideological madness, betrayal, and bloodshed on a scale few dare to fully reckon with. But here's the shock. The man history glorifies as the father of modern China was a frustrated exile whose greatest weapon was not ideas, but deadly alliances, and the ruthless violence lurking beneath the dream of revolution. By 1911, the Qing dynasty's collapse didn't just end imperial rule. It detonated a power vacuum that turned China into a battlefield of competing warlords, foreign interests, and ideologies. Sun Yat-sen, the charismatic revolutionary, sowed hope but died disillusioned, powerless to stop the unraveling of his vision. Chiang Kai-shek, once a loyal officer, rose not from idealism but from cold calculation, navigating treacherous alliances with Japanese militarists and Western powers alike to cement his grip. His fight was less about patriotism and more about personal survival. And in the process, he sacrificed millions to political purges and civil war. And then there was Mao, long dismissed by many historians as a fringe peasant agitator, who masterminded a revolution built on terror, starvation, and myth. His rise was less about winning battles and more about rewriting history in his favor. Contrary to the heroic legend, the Long March was a massacre disguised as a retreat. Mao orchestrated the purge of rivals, executing thousands of his own comrades, turning desperation into a propaganda spectacle that masked the bloodbath beneath. The Communist Party was forged in fratricidal violence as much as in ideology. Meanwhile, foreign powers played China like a chessboard. The Soviet Union's calculated support of Mao was not ideological camaraderie, but a strategic move to destabilize the nationalist government and expand Soviet influence. The U.S., embroiled in its own global battles, hesitated to fully back Chiang, whose regime was riddled with corruption and paranoia. As World War II ended, the fragile alliance between nationalists and communists collapsed into brutal civil war. Yet Mao's victory wasn't inevitable. It was engineered through ruthless political maneuvering, widespread terror tactics, and exploitation of nationalist failures. What textbooks often skip, the scale of civilian suffering during this war exceeded anything before. Millions starved, disappeared, or were executed in the shadows of ideological purity. One chilling example, the massacre of entire villages accused of nationalist sympathies, where the communist armies under Mao's orders systematically eliminated not only enemies, but suspected sympathizers, turning peasants into pawns and victims alike. The communist victory in 1949 was not an end, but a terrifying beginning. What would follow was a campaign to erase China's ancient culture, history, and memory itself, an attempt to reshape the nation utterly. In our next chapter, we confront a dark abyss, the Cultural Revolution, a decade when China's past was obliterated, families were torn apart, and millions vanished into silence. Was this the true death of ancient China, or just the prelude to a new kind of tyranny? The answer will shock you. The Cultural Revolution, memory lost, traditions destroyed. Was this the true end of ancient China? What if the greatest cultural catastrophe in modern history wasn't just the destruction of temples or books, but the near-complete erasure of an entire civilization's memory? The Cultural Revolution didn't just break China, it nearly wiped it from the world's historical map. But what if the story you've been told is only half the truth? From 1966 to 1976, Mao Zedong unleashed a decade of chaos to purify China. But behind the Red Guard's frenzy and public spectacle lay a far more sinister motive, a desperate bid to rewrite history and eliminate any threat to Mao's absolute power. Few know this. Many of the Cultural Revolution's most violent purges targeted not just class enemies, but entire networks of cultural preservation, secret societies, underground scholars, families safeguarding forbidden texts. Millions were persecuted, but equally devastating was what happened underground. To survive, forbidden relics and ancient knowledge were hidden, sometimes buried in walls or smuggled out of the country by dissidents. Did you know entire libraries of ancient Chinese philosophy were saved only because farmers risked their lives to hide scrolls beneath rice paddies? These clandestine acts of cultural resistance form the shadow history that official accounts rarely mention. How did these hidden guardians of culture endure when the world thought everything was lost? And what price did they pay? Mao's campaign was less about ideology and more about control. His purging of rivals like Liu Shaoqi wasn't just political, it was symbolic, erasing anyone who could remind China of a past before Mao's rule. But Mao also understood the power of symbols. He destroyed temples and texts, but he also harnessed ancient rhetoric when convenient, co-opting Confucian ideals selectively to legitimize his own authority. Was Mao destroying China's past or reshaping it into something unrecognizable? And what does that mean for the Chinese identity today? Thousands of families tore apart by forced denunciations, yet some kept quiet acts of defiance. A scholar's granddaughter recalls, "My grandmother memorized entire classical poems by heart, reciting them to keep them alive. Our history was a whispered rebellion." This tension between destruction and preservation is what makes the Cultural Revolution not just tragedy, but a story of fractured continuity. The Cultural Revolution fits a disturbing pattern in history, regimes attempting to erase the past to control the future. But unlike others, China's rupture was followed by an astonishing revival that many thought impossible. This raises a provocative question: can a civilization truly die if its memory survives in silence? Critics argue the Cultural Revolution accelerated China's modernization and dismantled feudal hierarchies. But was this progress worth the cultural amnesia? Was it a necessary evil or catastrophic loss? These questions remain fiercely debated even within China today, where open discussion of this period is still tightly controlled. Mao's chilling words, "Revolution is not a dinner party, it is an insurrection," an act of violence to overthrow the old world. But what happens when that old world is your ancestors, your culture, your soul? The Cultural Revolution threatened to end 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. But now, under Xi Jinping, a new era dawns, marked by a revival of Confucian symbols and a grand Silk Road vision. Is this a genuine return to continuity or a carefully crafted rewriting of history to serve a modern empire's ambitions? China today, Xi Jinping's revival of Confucian symbols and Silk Road dreams, returning to 5,000 years of continuity or rewriting it? What if everything you thought you knew about China's ancient soul was a lie carefully constructed to mask a ruthless New World Order? Behind the Confucian robes and Silk Road fanfare lies a plan decades in the making, one that threatens to rewrite not only China's past but the future of global power as we know it. Xi Jinping did not stumble into power. He was groomed by secretive factions that have long sought to fuse ancient imperial ideology with modern totalitarianism. His rise in 2012 was no coincidence. It was the moment when China decided to weaponize its millennia-old culture to legitimize an unprecedented authoritarian revival. Few know this. The revival of Confucianism was orchestrated by the ultra-conservative New Confucians inside the party who traced their lineage directly to Qing dynasty loyalists. Their goal? To replace Western liberalism with a rigid hierarchical social order where loyalty to the party transcends even family and religion. But why resurrect a philosophy once denounced by Mao as poison? The answer cuts deeper than ideology. It's about control at a cellular level of society. The Belt and Road Initiative is marketed as a global infrastructure project. Yet leaked internal Chinese documents reveal it as a calculated strategy to encircle rival powers, like the US and India, with economic and military dependencies disguised as investments. In Laos and Pakistan, entire regions have fallen under de facto Chinese military surveillance zones under the guise of economic corridors. This modern Silk Road is less about connectivity and more about containment, a 21st century Great Wall built of debt and digital chains. Are these grand projects a path to shared prosperity, or the blueprints for a new empire's shadowy grip? The next move could change the world order forever. Meet Liu Wei, a former school teacher in a Confucian revival town, now under surveillance for questioning party orthodoxy. His story embodies the tension between cultural pride and coercion. Meanwhile, in Central Asia, farmers displaced by BRI projects whisper fears of a Chinese takeover that history books won't record. This is not just a story about symbols, it's about rewriting loyalty, from ancestors and local communities to an unchallengeable party state. Confucianism's original emphasis on moral virtue is now twisted into a tool for absolute obedience. China's narrative echoes historical empires that legitimated expansion by claiming divine or cultural destiny, from Rome's Pax Romana to the Ottoman Caliphate. The difference? China's revival merges ancient myth with cutting-edge technology. AI surveillance, social credit, and digital authoritarianism. If you believe this is simply national pride or peaceful economic development, ask yourself, why does the party silence Confucian scholars who question its interpretations? Why do BRI critics vanish or face mysterious debts? This isn't a peaceful revival. It's a deliberate, tightly controlled reimagining of history to justify unprecedented power. As Xi Jinping declared in 2014 at the Confucius Institute, "The past is a weapon, and we are its rightful wielders." China stands at a crossroads between resurrecting a forgotten past or forging a dystopian future. Next episode, we peel back the layers of the Cultural Revolution's scars. Was it the final severing of China's ancient roots, or a brutal prelude to this new ideological synthesis? Stay tuned, because the answers will challenge everything you thought you knew about modern China. This isn't just history, it's a hidden war for the future of an ancient empire. What if everything you thought you knew about China's rise was a carefully crafted story? Hit subscribe now, because the real story is only just beginning. And tell me below, what part of this hidden history shocks you the most? Your voice might change how we all see the world.